She was drugged and raped by her husband and 72 men while she slept for 10 years. Imagine living in what seems like a perfect marriage in a peaceful small town, surrounded by family and friends who admire and respect you. Now imagine discovering, after years of suspicion and confusion, that your partner had been hiding a dark, horrifying secret. This is the shocking story of Gisèle Pelicot, a woman whose life was turned upside down in the most shocking way imaginable. Stay with me as we unravel this horrifying crime that rocked a small town in southern France and the entire world. The year is 2020, and Gisèle is a 60-year-old woman who, by all accounts, has spent her life raising her family with love and care. Married to her husband Dominique Pélicot for over 40 years, they had built a life together, a family, a home. From the outside, it looked perfect. But as we all know, appearances can be deceiving. Behind the closed doors of the Pelicot household was a nightmare so twisted, so shocking, that it would send ripples across the entire country. What started as a seemingly small and unrelated incident in 2020 would unravel a decade-long horror that left everyone, friends, family, and the entire town, in disbelief. How could something so heinous happen right under their noses? How could a woman be subjected to such torture without ever knowing? Today, we dive into the disturbing true crime story of Gisèle Pelicot, a story that serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the darkest secrets hide in plain sight. Dominique Pélicot, a man who had spent most of his adult life in Mazin, was known around town as a friendly, hard-working real estate agent. He was someone you could trust with a handshake, a family man who always had a smile for his neighbors and a joke for his friends. To most people, he seemed like the epitome of the good husband. He attended family events, helped organize town gatherings, and was always seen hand in hand with Gisèle. From the outside, their relationship was the envy of many. But behind closed doors, Dominique had a secret so dark that when it was finally uncovered, even those closest to him couldn't believe it. For nearly a decade, Dominique had been drugging his wife. And not just once or twice, but systematically, over and over again, for years. He would crush sleeping pills, dissolve them in her evening tea, or sprinkle them into her meals. He did it so subtly that Gisèle never noticed. After all, she trusted him, why wouldn't she? They had been married for so long. She had no reason to question the food or drink her husband lovingly prepared for her each day. But why would Dominique do such a thing? What possible motive could there be for drugging the woman he claimed to love? The answer is as shocking as the crime itself. Over the course of several years, Dominique had begun frequenting dark corners of the internet, chat rooms, message boards, and disturbing websites that catered to men with twisted desires. It was there that Dominique found an outlet for his sick fantasies. And soon, he began inviting strangers into their home to partake in his monstrous plan. These men, recruited from the internet, were just as twisted as Dominique. They came from all walks of life, teachers, firefighters, even police officers. But inside the Pelicot home, they were united by one thing, their willingness to abuse an unconscious woman. Dominique's system was horrifyingly efficient. He would drug Gisèle until she was unconscious, deep in a sleep from which she could not wake. Then, he would invite these men over, sometimes one, sometimes several at a time. They would arrive in the middle of the night, under the cover of darkness, when the town was asleep and no one was watching. Before entering the bedroom where Gisèle lay defenseless, Dominique would give them strict instructions. They were told not to make any noise, to undress in the kitchen, to avoid wearing strong cologne or using perfume. Anything that might alert Gisèle when she woke up was strictly prohibited. The men would then proceed to abuse her, sometimes for hours, all while Dominique stood by, recording the acts on his camera. Each visit was meticulously documented and stored in a folder on his computer, labeled innocuously as abuse. This went on for nearly 10 years. A decade of torment, a decade of betrayal, all while Gisèle had no idea what was happening to her. And when she awoke in the morning, feeling groggy and disoriented, Dominique would brush it off as stress, as fatigue, or as a symptom of aging. As the years passed, Gisèle began to notice changes in her body. She was constantly exhausted, despite sleeping for hours. Her head often throbbed with splitting headaches, and there were days when she struggled to remember even the simplest things. She began to worry, was she developing early-onset dementia? Her family shared her concerns, urging her to visit doctors and specialists. But no matter how many tests she underwent, no one could find a cause for her symptoms. Gisèle felt like she was losing control of her own body, her own mind. She became anxious, constantly worried about her health. There were even moments when she began to doubt herself. Was it all in her head? Was she simply imagining these symptoms? And then, there were the other, more disturbing signs. Gisèle began to suffer from recurring gynecological problems, frequent infections, unexplained bruises, and even sexually transmitted infections. These signs were puzzling to her. She was a faithful wife, always had been. She hadn't been with anyone else since she married Dominique all those years ago. How could this be happening? Her doctors were just as baffled. They ran test after test, but nothing made sense. Gisèle's world was slowly falling apart, and she had no idea why. Everything changed in 2020 when Dominique was caught engaging in a seemingly unrelated act of perversion. At a local supermarket, Dominique was arrested for using his phone to film up women's skirts. It was a disturbing act, but at the time, it seemed isolated, a crime of opportunity, committed by a man with poor impulse control. No one could have guessed that this minor incident would be the key to unlocking the full scope of Dominique's depravity. When Dominique was taken into custody, the police decided to search his home. It was during this search that they stumbled upon the folder on his computer labeled abuse. Inside, they found thousands of images and videos documenting the sexual assaults committed against Gisèle over the years. The evidence was overwhelming. Dominique was immediately arrested, and the investigation into his crimes began. The police were horrified by what they had uncovered. This was not a case of spontaneous, one-time abuse. This was a carefully planned, systematic violation that had been going on for nearly a decade.
The stand in southern France for the first time today, but a couple of hours ago it was announced that
Gisèle was brought in for questioning. At first, she couldn't understand why. What could she possibly know about the crimes her husband had committed? But when the police showed her the videos, her entire world collapsed. For the first time, Gisèle saw herself, lying unconscious, completely unaware of what was happening to her. She watched as strange men she had never seen before walked into her bedroom as they violated her body while she lay defenseless. The realization was too much to bear. Everything began to make sense, her unexplained illnesses, the infections, the bruises, the memory lapses. It wasn't stress, it wasn't aging, it wasn't in her head. Her husband had been drugging and abusing her for nearly a decade. And she had never known. In court, Gisèle described the moment she saw the footage. "My world collapsed," she said. "Everything I had believed in for 50 years turned out to be a lie." The trauma of discovering what had happened to her was unbearable. Gisèle had to confront not only the horrors of the abuse itself, but also the immense betrayal by the man she had shared her life with. The realization that her husband, a man she had trusted with her very being, had orchestrated this nightmare left her feeling shattered. She described feeling like she had been living a nightmare in broad daylight, with no idea that the person closest to her was the source of all her suffering.
Some 50 men are on trial, accused of...
Gisèle began to question everything. Every memory, every loving moment she had shared with Dominique, every decision she had made during their marriage, had it all been a lie? She felt as though her entire life had been stolen from her. The years she had spent caring for her family, building a life together, had been overshadowed by Dominique's monstrous actions. Physically, Gisèle had endured years of pain, discomfort, and confusion. She had been to countless doctors, searching for answers to her mysterious ailments. The headaches, the fatigue, the gynecological issues, no one had been able to explain why she felt so unwell. But now she knew the truth. Her body had been reacting to the years of drugging and abuse. The symptoms were not the result of some undiagnosed illness or age-related decline. They were the direct result of her husband's long-running assault on her body. The emotional toll was even more devastating. Gisèle spoke about the shame and humiliation she felt when the truth came out. For years, she had prided herself on being a devoted wife and mother, a pillar of strength for her family. Now, she felt stripped of that identity. She no longer knew who she was or what her life had meant. It wasn't just the abuse that haunted her, it was the betrayal, the manipulation, and the fact that she had been living in darkness for so long, unaware of the horrors happening to her. Dominique's manipulation of Gisèle extended beyond the physical abuse. Over the years, he had carefully crafted a facade of love and care. He would bring her breakfast in bed, offer her massages when she complained of feeling unwell, and dote on her in front of their family and friends. To everyone around them, he appeared to be the perfect husband. But behind this mask of affection was a man who was gaslighting his wife. Whenever Gisèle would complain of feeling tired or foggy, Dominique would dismiss her concerns. He would tell her she was just getting older, that it was natural to feel fatigued as she aged. When she experienced unexplained infections or other health issues, he would suggest that she was overreacting or imagining things. This constant gaslighting caused Gisèle to doubt herself, to question her own judgment and intuition. She began to believe that maybe she was simply being paranoid, that her body was betraying her, not her husband. Dominique's manipulation was so complete, so insidious, that Gisèle never once suspected him. She trusted him completely, even as her body and mind deteriorated under the effects of his abuse. As the investigation into Dominique's crimes unfolded, the authorities began to uncover more and more disturbing details about the men who had participated in the abuse. These men, who had been brought into the Pelicot home under Dominique's direction, came from all walks of life. Some were professionals, teachers, nurses, even law enforcement officers. Men who, in their daily lives, were supposed to uphold the values of decency and integrity. But within the walls of the Pelicot home, they became willing participants in Dominique's twisted scheme. These men knew exactly what they were doing. They knew that Gisèle had not consented, that she was unconscious, drugged, and utterly defenseless. Yet, they continued to come, night after night, to commit unspeakable acts of violence against her. Many of them tried to defend their actions in court, claiming that they thought it was part of a consensual game between Dominique and his wife. They insisted that they had no idea Gisèle had been drugged, that they had been misled by Dominique. But Dominique's own testimony destroyed their defense. He admitted that he had made it clear to every one of them, Gisèle was not a willing participant, and she had no knowledge of what was happening. The sheer number of men involved in the abuse was staggering. Dozens of men, all complicit in Dominique's monstrous plan, had used Gisèle as an object, a thing, with no regard for her humanity. The betrayal extended beyond her husband. She had been violated by a network of men, each of whom had contributed to her suffering.
Gisèle lost weight.
The legal battle that followed Dominique's arrest was long and painful. Gisèle, despite her immense trauma, made the brave decision to waive her right to anonymity. She wanted the world to know what had happened to her. She wanted to reclaim her story, to shift the shame away from herself and onto the men who had violated her. In court, Gisèle spoke with unflinching bravery. She described the abuse in detail, not just as a physical violation, but as psychological torture. They used me like an object, she told the court. They took away my life without me even knowing. It was as if I had no control over my own body. Dominique, sitting in the defendant's chair, showed little remorse. He admitted to drugging his wife and organizing the abuse, but he tried to downplay his involvement, blaming the men he had invited into their home. He claimed that he had only been a facilitator, not an active participant in the abuse. But the evidence, including the videos he had filmed, told a different story.
Public places,
Despite the unimaginable trauma she had endured, Gisèle refused to remain silent. She became a powerful advocate for victims of drug-facilitated sexual violence, sharing her story with the world in the hopes of preventing others from suffering the same fate. Her decision to speak out was not an easy one. She faced judgment, scrutiny, and even disbelief from some who couldn't fathom how such a crime could go unnoticed for so long. But Gisèle knew that by sharing her story, she was reclaiming her power. She had been a victim for far too long, but now, she was determined to become a survivor. Her courage inspired countless others to come forward, to share their own stories of abuse, and to seek justice. The case of Dominique Pélicot and the men involved in the abuse had far-reaching implications, not just for the town of Mazan, but for the entire country of France and beyond. It raised difficult and uncomfortable questions about the nature of sexual violence, consent, and the systems that allow such crimes to go unnoticed for years. How could this happen for nearly a decade without anyone noticing? How could a woman be subjected to such horrific abuse, right under the noses of her friends, family, and doctors? The case highlighted the failings of the medical and legal systems, which had been unable to detect the signs of abuse, despite Gisèle's repeated complaints about her health. Today, Gisèle continues to fight for justice, not just for herself, but for all victims of sexual violence. Her daughter, seeing the need for awareness, launched a national campaign titled "Don't Put Me to Sleep," aimed at raising awareness about drug-facilitated sexual violence and the insidious ways in which abusers manipulate their victims. But Gisèle's journey is far from over. While Dominique and the men involved in her abuse face trial, Gisèle is determined to ensure that justice is served, not just for her, but for every woman who has been silenced, betrayed, and abused. As the trial moves forward, the world watches, waiting for the verdict that will bring closure to this harrowing chapter of Gisèle's life. But no matter the outcome, one thing is clear: Gisèle Pelicot is no longer a victim. She is a survivor, and her story will continue to inspire and empower others for years to come.
The case has sharpened long-standing concerns over the legal definition of rape in French law.
This is the story of Gisèle Pelicot, a woman who faced unimaginable horrors, yet refused to be broken. Her courage, her strength, and her unwavering determination to seek justice remind us all that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as shocking and important as we did, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and stay tuned for more stories that need to be told. Take care of yourselves, and remember, trust can be broken in the blink of an eye.